Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
All right, welcome in, and here we go. It's David Summers, and it's another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. It's the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. So now, we step back into the ring, back into time. We get wall-to-wall, treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. So we've got really hot weather almost everywhere around the USA for now. What's it like up higher in Tennessee, Ron?
Oh, man, I guess we're lucky, Dave. You know, we're in the 80s, nighttime into the 60s.
Oh.
You know, wow, man, it's pays to be in the mountains, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's why they call it God's country, right?
Sure cooler than what's going on down there. I see what y'all are getting.
Man, we're in mid to upper 90s a good portion of the daytime, and then maybe 75 in the overnight, which is still a little sticky no matter what time of day it is. Hey, listen, I got to tell you this, Ron. Your last Studcast was the most downloaded one ever. I'm not sure if you knew that.
No, man, I wasn't, man. I wasn't aware of that, man. You know, I guess I'm really lucky, Dave. I got such a broad and dedicated audience, man. I got fans literally from all over the world.
Well, you're probably too humble to admit this whole thing, but it's truly amazing. The more episodes your Studcast airs, the bigger the fan base seems to get. Your next Studcast after this one will be, can you believe this? 6 years you've been doing this, Stud.
Wow, it's hard to believe, man. That's 1/3 as long as my entire wrestling career, man. I only wrestled for 18 years, and I've been doing these for 6. Wow, it's amazing. You know, I've lived a blessed life, man. I thank everybody out there listening, and I hope you can continue. Hope we can continue this, man, for another 6 years. I feel like my family's unique story, man, and its contribution to the sport is maybe the reason we have so many listeners.
Okay, Stud, going back to the last Studcast, number 310, in my opinion, it was the most downloaded one yet, with completely different historic information about all kinds of subjects. Both territories were covered in this thing. It had an NWA convention story, a tribute to 2 fallen stars, a complete all-star card from Knoxville, an opinion on what may be coming in the Gulf Coast Territory's future, and it had a whole bunch more than that, Ron.
Well, I think it was certainly a good example of what I was experiencing in the summer 1979. My life, man, was like a roller coaster with all these new twists and turns every day. This was a great example of what I'm talking about. In the same week that we're going to be talking about in this Studcast, I was in Las Vegas for another NWA meeting. This time, I wasn't there as a guest wrestler like the last time that I've talked about with some of the fans, but I was going to be there as an NWA owner member. At 27 years old, I was the youngest owner inductee in the history of the NWA, and by 1979, I was already a member for 5 years.
Wow. Wow. You were a kid when you joined, I guess you would say. That's a remarkable, Stud. At only 32, you had already been a member of the National Wrestling Alliance for 5 years.
That's correct, man. things obviously were happening fast for me. And when I look back at it, 6 years later, at 37, I was going to be elected vice president of the NWA.
Okay, wait now. I never knew that you were the vice president of the NWA.
Yeah, man. NWA meeting information, it wasn't common knowledge. I mean, fans didn't know anything about that stuff. And sadly, 3 years later, if you think about this, Dave, really amazing, is 1985 I was the vice president. 3 years later, in the summer of 88, I left the sport entirely, along with most of the owners that had been meeting every summer in Las Vegas for more than 30 years, man. Everything fell apart. All of wrestling changed over a short period in that 3 years from 85 to about 88. I never saw most of those guys again. But the really sad part about it was wrestling. The sport itself was never the same again, ever.
I can certainly agree with that. I can't believe we started this Studcast this way. I guess that's why we get into so many things each episode now, Ron. The rides are so different each time we saddle up. This one is called, this is number 311. Number 311, it's called Golf Andre versus Ox, Tennessee, Dad's Back. So which one is first today? How do we start?
Well, I think we're going to begin, man, with begin this ride in the southeastern Knoxville territory. We're going to take one of the first of several deep dives into where my mind was kind of concerning the future of that particular territory. And obviously thinking about the Gulf Coast as well, but wow, the Knoxville situation was really totally different than anything I'd ever experienced. So we'll be discussing the August the 17th, Knoxville card, 1979. We'll talk about the TV that promoted that card. We'll talk about the results of that card, the attendance. Plus, we'll talk about the attendance for the All-Star opposition wrestling match. Was the night after ours. And then we'll be in the southeastern Gulf Coast territory. We'll be looking at the Pensacola card, which was headlined by Andre the Giant versus Ox Baker. And Andre was a very rare, for him was an extremely rare one-day visit. That was very unusual. He used to stay 4 or 5 days. And we'll talk about that TV show down there and the difficulty in putting that show together, because we had a superstar, but he's only in one city for a week's worth of matches. That's not a good situation for you in trying to put together a TV show. So then we'll give the results of the Pensacola card. We'll talk about the attendances down there, and obviously in the other 3 major markets down there as well. And I'm also going to follow up on some things that we spoke of last Studcast about the likelihood of competition in the Gulf Coast territory as well as Tennessee.
Wow.
I keep saying it, man. Hopefully we're going to have a learning tree question in here one of these days again. And I feel kind of confident. Hopefully today, Dave, this is going to be our day to get a learning tree in.
Well, that does sound ambitious, Stud. We'll see what happens. So listen, I keep thinking it too. So, all right, you got so much information in history, every Studcast lately, that we're lucky to finish in an hour and a half. That being said, let's shoot for that learning tree question and get to writing right now. So where was your mind concerning the southeastern Knoxville territory in the middle of August of the dreaded year 1979?
Well, man, I was very disappointed that we had not been able to significantly grow the Knoxville cards since the war began, which at this point was about 10 weeks earlier, 10 Studcasts ago. We were starting the Knoxville War. And the always popular Knoxville Fair was coming in 2 weeks. Now we're in late August. And, so you've got the fair arriving, you've got school starting back. And it was officially basically the fall of the year. And all 3 of those events, it led up to it being the worst time for the sport. And it wasn't just in the South, and it wasn't in Tennessee and just along the Gulf Coast. Traditionally, the fall of the year was the worst for wrestling all over the country. So I'd hoped by this point our crowds for Knoxville would have been back up into that 5,000 range where it had been for about 2 years, the last two, almost 3 years. And that would have given us the momentum that we needed to survive this. Every fall, the business used to drop off at least about 20%. And that always occurred and had been every fall since I had been there. The last show was the biggest of the summer. The last one, the last week's show, biggest of the summer so far. But it was only 4,000. So in addition to all of this, soon the opening of the fair was going to knock us out of Hyde Park completely for 3 weeks. So we had booked the most expensive, place we could go, the Coliseum. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to avoid going back to Bill Meyer baseball stadiums like we always had in that first couple of weeks of September because, we'd never drawn a big crowd there. We had never had a great results in that Bill Meyer Stadium. So we had set up to go to the Coliseum instead. So the anticipated 20% drop, if you think about it, from that 4,000 fans who was there in the last show, that could mean that we're going to expect maybe no more than about 3,200 for the shows that are upcoming after that. For each of those 3 expensive Coliseum shows coming up, that's not a good deal. That 3,200 fans at an average ticket price about $4 a person, which it was back in those days, equaled just about a $13,000 gross.
Okay, this is really interesting to me, Stud. You have never broken things down for us quite like this before. You said you were going to give us an idea of where your mind was concerning the future of the Tennessee Territory. So this is a series of very bad-looking, predicted future houses, especially with the additional expenses of running in the Coliseum. So what do you think was running through the minds of the Knoxville Five while all this was going on?
Well, none of them had ever owned a wrestling business before, those 5 guys. They'd just been wrestlers. So I doubt they're even taking a look at the future, and if they were, it wasn't looking good for them either, obviously. Their houses were a lot smaller. They were also going to lose the park's facilities because the fair went into the park. They took the amphitheater for close to 3 weeks, and we were going to be out of there for 3 weeks, and so were they. So, and they were also going to drop off 20%, whether they knew it or not, it was going to happen to them because that was the way business was. And there was this crowd, their last crowd was only about 700. So if they dropped off 20% off of their 700 crowd, they were only going to draw around 500 fans for the next 3 weeks after this event. So the 500 fans, an average ticket price of $4 a person, was about $2,000 gross compared to $13,000 that we were going to be drawing.
Yeah, that's there's a pretty good difference right there. That's fascinating stuff, Stud. So what were your thoughts about these figures and the future of southeastern Knoxville?
Well, remember, Dave, there were 2 territories for me to consider, not just one. I had to think about both territories. And in the second part of this Studcast, we're going to take a closer look at the southeastern Gulf Coast territory. And we'll be talking about it in the same form and fashion as we have about this little thing here with Knoxville. And then I guess I'll probably be better able to give everybody an answer to that question, about the future of southeastern Knoxville.
Okay, fair enough. So let's start with the Knoxville card in Chilhowie Park then. Friday night, August 17th, 1979.
Well, the opening match was Ted Allen versus Knoxville's Rick Connors. Trained guys around there, had been around there a long time. Pretty good little wrestler, too, and a pretty decent little shooter. Dean Ho was meeting Eddie Mansfield. Paul Orndorff, making his second appearance, was taking on Alexis Smirnoff. Man, he's jumped up big time from Eddie Mansfield the week before. Tony Charles wrestled a masked newcomer, the Korean Assassin, whose size and body very much resembled Kevin Sullivan, that had lost the loser leave Southeastern match to Dick Slater the week before. So I'm not going to say exactly who he was, but he certainly looked like Kevin Sullivan, I'd say, the Korean Assassin did. Then for the Southeastern Championship, the new champion, Mongolian Stomper, managed by Gorgeous George Jr., was going to be defending against Dick Slater, who lost the belt to him 2 weeks earlier in the lumberjack match. the one in which Kevin Sullivan got involved. And then the main event was the 6-man elimination match. No disqualification, no time limit. And as a man was defeated in these elimination matches, he had to go to the dressing room. And the match went on until all 3 of the men on one of the teams had been defeated. Obviously, the other team at that point won. It was going to be all 3 of the Fullers, me, Rob, and my dad. And we were going to be against Jimmy Golden, Norvell Austin, and Tora Tanaka.
Okay, that was a very good 6-card match. So what was on the TV to promote the match?
Well, Dick Slater was at the set with Les, and he had beaten Kevin Sullivan in the loser leaves Southeastern match the very night before. They watched a video of that match, and Slater said how glad he was to have Sullivan gone and out of here. And Les invited him to stay at the set with him for comments because the new Southeastern champion, the Mongolian Stomper, who had won it 2 weeks before and was managed by George Jr., was in that first TV match. Obviously, the Mongol got himself another win. And then in the second match, boy, we had a very impressive man, and I got to say he really was Paul Orndorff, man, at this point in his life. Wow. And he got his first TV win. He was fantastic shape. Gosh, he was ripped. And the fans loved him from the very beginning. And they were really getting behind him big time after a guy had only been there 2 weeks. That didn't happen normally. And like I said, it was his second week in the territory, and he was going to be moving up the card fast, no doubt about that. The personality profile was with all 3 of the Fullers, my dad, Rob, and I. We watched videos from 2 matches the night before. And our father had been there that night before. He came to see the matches because it was a big night for us. So me and Rob were going back to trying to win our Southeastern Tag Championship back from Tanaka and Fuji. And plus Rob had his hair up against Jimmy Golden in the hair versus hair match. So Dad had come to watch both of those events. And so on the end of this first video, we watched the night before, both of them from the night before. I had the Fuller leg lock on Mr. Fuji on the end of the tag match. Rob was tied up with Tanaka. The referee was with Rob and Tanaka. Fuji was doing his best to fight his way out of the Fuller leg lock, man. I don't think he'd ever put on that hold on him before. I don't think he realized there's no getting out of this, dude. You're hurting yourself for no reason. You ain't going anywhere. And so Gorgeous George Jr., at this point, referee's back turned. He's over there with Rob and Tanaka. He starts to come into the ring. And obviously his mindset was he's going to kick me off and see what happened from there. But then nobody even knew that my dad was there. Obviously, people didn't know. He wasn't making himself present out there to everybody. And all of a sudden, Dad runs down the ringside and he grabs Gigi's leg. He just holds on to his leg. Well, Fuji wasn't going anywhere, man. And so finally, he had to give it up. And I knew, man, I'd hurt his leg bad. Sometimes when I had that hold, you get excited. You could hear tendons tear, and some funny stuff happened with that hold. And so it turned out to be Fuji's last Southeastern match ever. Tanaka was furious, man, when the match was ended, and he picked up Fuji, drug him over to the edge of the mat, and he picked up Fuji in his arms like he was a baby, man. Carried him back to the dressing room. It was the last time the two of those guys ever wrestled together as partners in Southeastern. Then the profile kind of changed gears at that point. So we watched Rob's match against Jimmy for the hair. And Rob was about to finish him off in this match. And then Norvell and Tanaka came back to the ring. It ended up with a kind of strange situation, for Jimmy, because we had beat Norvell and Tanaka both, and we were all 3 of us still involved in the match, and Jimmy was by himself. So turned out to be a wild ending to the match. Before Robert could leave the ring, Dad and I kind of kind of stopped Jimmy. So, it was that we threw him back in the ring, and he had lost his hair. He had lost his hair from the week before, and Dad and I had held him down, and Rob sheared his hairs off, and then all three of us, man, had the barber come in and finish up the job. So the amazing part of this profile, Dave, was how much the studio crowd, having been there the night before, enjoyed watching this video again. It was like, basically we watched the Jimmy get his head shaved, the whole deal, and I think they enjoyed it more than they did when it actually happened, man. And that was kind of a tribute to Jimmy Golden's commitment and his skill, man, of making himself a complete transformation from a baby face to a red hot heel in only 5 weeks. He'd only been heel for 5 weeks. He had that much heat. So you add the fact shaving his head was probably one of the hardest things for him to handle as a young, good-looking man. And it said everything about how much Jimmy loved the sport to allow himself to allow us to cut his hair off. And wow, and pretty amazing old down deal.
Yeah, and I don't recall if you have ever told us if you had summertime ratings or not. But for me, as a youngster watching TV, that was a huge spike. That was a huge bonus. And I can imagine people were getting on phones near and far going, hey, did you see Jimmy Golden get his head shaved? They showed it on TV. So I find it hard to believe you could talk Jimmy or any wrestler into getting his head shaved unless there was some kind of other compensation. So what about that? Did that happen for him?
Yeah, man. I mean, you can imagine, Dave, I ended up giving him $500, man, $500 bonus to shave his head.
That was a lot back then, but I would have still been like, that's it?
Wow. Well, you got to bear in mind, Dave, this was 1979.
Yeah.
In today's money, that $500 was more than $2,000.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. Right.
So, and then think about this. Back in that day in 1979, you could buy a brand new Ford, like a Fairlane, for less than $1,500. So, for 3 times the money I gave him, he could buy a brand new car. Right? I mean, it was that $500 was a lot of money.
Yeah, when you're thinking about it that way, okay, I'll go with you on that. It's still hard to imagine today, but I'm sure that was true back then. So the things that we get into here, that's amazing. All right, this is another eye-opening Studcast, obviously. So what was the next thing on that TV show?
Well, Gorgeous George Jr. came to the set. He brought Tanaka with him, and he brought a new masked man with him. Nobody had ever seen it to this point. Gigi introduced him as the Korean assassin. Here's the Fullers, especially Ron Fuller, is hurt Fuji, and obviously he's not going to be here. And we got a new guy for Tanaka here, the Korean assassin. That's his name. So they watched the end of the same video that we'd watched in the personality profile, where Rob and I had won the Southeastern belts back from Fuji and Tanaka. And Fuji being carried to the dressing room by Tanaka the night before. And Gigi said that his new man, the Korean assassin, because of what had happened last night, but right now he was going to begin to get even for Mr. Fuji's injury. So when this masked man, followed by Gorgeous George Jr. and Tanaka, headed for the ring, the fans got their first good look at him, right? And almost instantly, there was no doubt who he was. Even though you couldn't see his face, his body was instantly recognizable. Kevin had a unique body, right? And so Kevin had lost the loser-leave Southeastern match the night before to Dick Slater. And so the studio audience, man, they just started, Kevin. Like they knew who he was. Pretty much as soon as they saw him, it was like, wow, we know who this is. So Tony Charles was wrestling Kevin the next, in the next week. So and he came to the set with Les, and he was laughing about it. He said, he said, if I didn't Kevin Sullivan Les, he goes under that mask. He said, he has to be his twin. He must have a twin. Right? So everything about Kevin at this point, wearing a mask, called himself Korean Assassin, was pretty much a joke. But, well, it wasn't a joke to the guy that was wrestling Kevin when he got to the ring, man. I mean, Kevin was, he was like a different person. He was just devastating. He did some horrible things to the guy, and then he clotheslined him at the end of the match, and the guy had to be carried, man, from the ring. I mean, he couldn't get up, and Tanaka and Gigi are both raising the Kevin's hand, the Korean Assassin's hand, and they're making a big deal out of it. And wow, after watching him work as a heel, I was like, son of a gun, Kevin's going to be a monster.
All right, hang on, Ron. Kevin Sullivan lost a loser's leave match, Southeastern match, the night before, and he comes back the next day on TV with Gorgeous George Jr. as his manager. He's wearing a mask and calling himself the Korean Assassin. So how can he do that? How does he get away with that?
And nobody saw his face, right? I mean,
right.
I mean, they saw his body, obviously.
There was no chant from the crowd, right?
Yeah, everybody knew who it was, right? But, until somebody took that mask off and proved it was Kevin Sullivan, nobody's going to do anything about it, right? So I'll say this. He certainly had everybody's attention, that's for sure, man, in his first appearance. The last TV match, man. Jimmy Golden, Norvell Austin, and Tora Tanaka was three very unlucky opponents in that match. Golden wore a shower cap over his bald head, had it strapped down tightly underneath his chin. And these three, man, were extremely angry, man. Just about did as much damage as the Korean Assassin had in the match before him. 6-man elimination match 6 days later with them, and the three of us was going to be a classic.
Yeah. All right, that was great TV. So what happened the next Friday night in Chilhowie Park Amphitheater?
Well, Ted Allen beat Rick Connors in the opening match. Dean Ho and Eddie Mansfield wrestled to a 20-minute time limit draw. Paul Orndorff got his biggest win yet. He beat Alexis Smirnoff, man, which was, wow, pretty amazing. Paul was in his first or second year, man, he looked great. In a special challenge match, the Korean Assassin got a very big win over Tony Charles. He actually beat Tony Charles. I think Kevin was much better as the Korean Assassin as he was as Kevin. Then the Southeastern Championship match between the champion Mongolian Stomper, managed by Gorgeous George Jr. and Dick Slater, was won by Slater, but it was by disqualification, so the Stomper was still the champion. And then the elimination tag was different than most fans expected. We were able to eliminate both Norvell and Tora Tanaka without any of the three of us losing the fall. And at that point, it was basically all three of us against Jimmy Golden. Right? So Jimmy got out of the ring and he took the microphone and he challenged me and Dad to leave the ring and let just Robert and him go at it alone. Right? So Rob told us to go, and the crowd wanted to see it too, right? Because they'd already seen the hair from the week before, So we went back to the dressing room, and as soon as we disappeared into the dressing room, well, here came Norvell and Tanaka running back to the ring, and all three of them got Rob busted his eye, and before we could get back to the ring, they kind of ran amok in there, and then. When we got back to the ring, referee, they ran. The three of them just left the ring. Rob was laying there. He was bleeding. And the ref counted Golden out, and he raised our hands. And it wasn't the way we or the fans had wanted it to end. But, none of us got beat, But, wow, it ended up in a nasty deal. So Rob was really upset. We finally got his faculties about him, and he grabbed the microphone from the announcer, who was announcing that we had won the match, and he challenged Golden, and he challenged him to a loser leave Southeastern match the next week. He said, Jimmy Golden, I want to have a loser leave with you, man. I'm not finished with you. I want to finish with you. You'll be gone. So Jimmy came out of the dressing room, but he wouldn't come to the ring because he was afraid that we'd get him. And so he motioned the announcer to bring the microphone to him back by where he was by the dressing room. And he said, "Yeah, Robert, I'll take your challenge." He says, but here's the deal. He goes, "I'll leave. If you beat me, Rob, I'll leave." But he goes, "But I want you, if I beat you, I want you to shave your head." So the match was made then and there for the next main event the next week.
All right, let me get this straight. Rob was going to have his head shaved if he lost, and Jimmy was going to leave Southeastern if he lost.
That was it. That was the main event for the next week, man. And also in our next Studcast, that's going to be the main event, obviously. And luckily, it was going to be in the Coliseum because the amphitheater was getting set up for the Tennessee Fair. We were going to be out there for 3 weeks. It was the first of those 3. And the beautiful part of that was we didn't have to worry about the rain, man.
Okay, so that lost night due to rain happened a month earlier. I can see where being inside the Coliseum had to take a load off your mind. So how about the attendance for that particular night?
Well, we had about 3,500 that night. It was down from the 4,000, about 500 down from the week before. But it was still 2,500 more fans than the All-Star crowd the next night.
All right.
They were still struggling along.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, so another great first half of this Studcast. I'll tell you what, folks, when we return, we're going to be welcoming Andre the Giant to Pensacola, Florida, versus the enormous Ox Baker. That's coming up when this Studcast continues in a moment. Hey, Studcast fans, are you aware that Ron has 43 Super Studcast on his tnstud.com website for only $2.99 each? More than 30 different wrestlers join him live with their stories and experiences. The most up-close and personal interviews in wrestling history. Tributes to fallen stars like Andre the Giant, Bob Armstrong, Ron Wright, the Assassin Jody Hamilton, Adrian Street, and Jim Barnett. Each and every one of them, almost 3 hours long. Go to tnstud.com. tnstud.com. Click Super Studcast. Make your choice. Only $2.99 each. Sit back in the saddle and ride into history. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back in. This has been so much great information in the first part of this one, Ron. I can't wait to hear about the Andre the Giant and Ox Baker match in the Southeastern Gulf Coast territory that's coming up in this half. The last time Andre came to the Gulf Coast territory was 3 months earlier to wrestle the Hulk in Pensacola, Florida. He was back again in the same city. So who else was on that card? It's Tuesday night, August 14th, 1979. What you got?
Well, Roy Lee Welch opened up that card against Herb Calvert. Ron Slinker wrestled against a really good wrestler from Columbus, Georgia, Ted Oates. Crusher Blackwell wrestled against the Inferno. It was a Southeastern Championship match. The champion, Austin Idol, defended against Pierre Bonnet, guy from Montreal, Canada, a good friend of Louis Tillet's. Pretty darn good wrestler, too. The Southeastern Tag Belts were on the line. The champion Assassins defending against the Samoans. And the main event, man, was another one of those Battle of the Giants like it had been about 3 months earlier. 7'4", 484-pound Andre the Giant against 6'8", 325-pound Ox Baker.
Wow. All right. So that's another very good 6-card match. 2 championship matches and an excellent main event. So how about the TV that sets all this up?
Well, that's where the problem was, Dave. Andre was only in for one night. And how do you build a TV show around the best possible main event that you could have in the territory, but it's going to only appear in one city out of the 6 for that week? Mm-hmm. And even that city is not one of the 3 largest cities. So, it's really it was like a booker's nightmare. except for the Pensacola night, this was destined to be pretty much another bad week down there. TV was going to have to promote, that it wasn't going to be able to promote Andre big time, and with it, because he wasn't in two out of the three major markets.
Mm-hmm.
Only the Mobile market was going to have the promotion and the mention of Andre at all. So the best Mobile TV could get to promote Andre and Ox was an interview from Andre, and that was going to be inserted in the personality profile in the Mobile TV show.
All right,
So it's crazy, man.
Okay, I guess this is what you mentioned earlier in the Studcast about the difficulty of putting together a TV show, which when you had a star that was going to appear, but only once in one city.
Yeah, it's a huge problem for any booker. It almost, it was almost not worth it to have him there at all. That sound like that could be true, but it is, And when it was only for one night, it was very, very difficult to book your entire week off of that. So the card for all three of the major cities was going to have a different main event than the Pensacola card, which actually was Ox Baker meeting Andre. But in all the other cities, Ox Baker is going to be wrestling against Crusher Blackwell in the three major cities in the Texas Death Match. That's the main event in those towns. So this TV opened with Charlie Platt, Ox Baker at the set. It was the third week in a row that Ox was meeting Crusher Blackwell. And it was the first week. The first week they met in a regular match. The second time they met in a lumberjack match. And then this coming week in the three major cities, they were going to be wrestling in a Texas Death Match. Well, Ox had both of his fists taped, and he bragged that he was finally going to be in a Texas Death Match with Blackwell. And he said, that was going to be Crusher's last match because he said he was the only wrestler, talking about himself, Ox. He said, I'm basically the only wrestler known the world over for actually creating death in death matches.
Are you kidding, Ron? All right, after what really happened in two matches in his career, when he heart punched both wrestlers, they died. He said that in an interview.
Gosh, well, I'll tell you what, it was a pretty nasty deal. Charlie called me up on the phone as soon as the TV was over, and he said, "Ox said this on TV, And that fact, it wasn't common knowledge to every wrestling fan, and definitely wasn't known by people that didn't know much about wrestling. So after saying that, Ox went to the ring and he did his thing, man, which was basically to scare all the fans almost to death. I mean, he was a scary dude, and now he had made an interview saying, he brings death to death matches. I mean, wow, it's crazy. So before the second TV match, the Gladiator joined Charlie at the set, and he watched his non-title win over the Southeastern champion Austin Idol from Mobile 3 days earlier, which was a very rare loss for Idol. Idol had beaten some great competition in the last few weeks, and he got tagged by the Gladiator. So Idol made his feelings about the loss, man, crystal clear. He was in the second match, and as soon as Gladiator bragged about beating him, Idol was wrestling Herb Calvert, and he had no sympathy for Calvert. He put his figure four leg lock on him. He wasn't going to let him up even after Calvert submitted, and Gladiator had to leave the set and went to the ring, and that's the only way Idol was going to let him go, it appeared. So Gladiator was going to be facing Idol for the Southeastern belt in all three of the major cities, except for Pensacola, because Idol was going to be defending his belt there against Pierre Bonet. So the personality profile in both the Montgomery and Dothan TV shows was with the new star, Crusher Blackwell. And he was facing Ox Baker in the Texas Death Match in all three of those major cities. Crusher was very humble, soft-spoken, always was, and he had grown up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta, and that was the former home of Ray Gunkel, the one of the two wrestlers that had died after a heart punch from Ox Baker. happened in Savannah, Georgia. 7 years earlier, in fact, that match happened. And so Crusher was a huge Ray Gunkel fan, and he told the story of Ray's death, which was a pretty sad deal, how it all went down. And then he focused on Ox Baker and what he intended to do in these upcoming Texas death matches. And he had heard Ox say, that I know how to cause death in these death matches, and so he said Ox Baker might have a hard punch, but he said, Charlie, so do I, and he says, and my heart punch is totally different. He says, my heart punch is I'm going to climb up on that top rope and I'm going to jump off for 425 pounds in the Baker's chest, and that's my heart punch.
Wow, that's close to an earthquake, too, I think. All right, that sounded like a great profile. I noticed Mobile's TV show did not get this profile. So what did they do on their profile?
Well, the Mobile TV show had its own personality profile. We were pre-recorded it before the TV show began in Dothan. And this one had Ox Baker on it with Charlie. And it showed the interview that Andre the Giant had sent in, plugging the match in Pensacola. And because of that, man, Andre was a huge draw. We anticipated we were going to get another sellout in Pensacola. And we anticipated, because it had happened when Hulk had wrestled Andre there a couple of months earlier, that a lot of people from Mobile, because it's only 50 miles from Pensacola, were going to come to Pensacola again like they had last time. So let's get back to the present TV show. Crusher, he had done his personality profile live right there in front of the audience. So as soon as he finished the profile, he went straight in the ring. And he amazed fans again because what he could do with his huge 425 pounds was amazing. And he won the match with 2 back-to-back drop kicks planted perfectly with both feet right in the opponent's face at 425 pounds. Man, he was a marvel. TV show ended with the Southeastern Tag Champion, Assassins, getting a strong win. While the former champions, the Samoans, sat down with Charlie to sit, they talked about the team and how good these Assassins were. Mm-hmm. And, they were getting another chance to win their championship back.
All right, so that sounds like a really good TV show as well, Stud. But what happened in Pensacola Tuesday night, August 14th, 1979?
Well, Roy Lee Welch pulled out a win over Herc Calvert. Ron Slinker beat Ted Oates. Crusher Blackwell got the best of the Inferno. Austin Idol successfully defended his Southeastern belt against the Canadian, Pierre Bonnet. In the Southeastern Tag Championship match, both teams got disqualified. That had been pretty much what they'd been doing in every town, the Samoans and the Assassins. Match was called a no contest. Then in the Andre and Ox Baker, the last match, Roy Lee told me, wow, Ron, it was an unbelievable match. He said the Assassins at the end of the match came down. Andre was about to finish Ox off, and the Assassins came down to the ring to help Ox. And they said that once they got there, they stopped Andre, and the 2 Assassins held Andre, and Ox Baker hit him with a heart punch. And Crusher Blackwell and then the Samoans came down then to Andre's rescue, basically. And Roy said there was almost a riot, man, when Baker and the Assassins left the ring trying to get back to the dressing room. Fans were really, really upset. They had to help Andre back to the dressing room.
Wow.
Had to be a crazy, wild match.
It sounds like a very dangerous finish to a great night of wrestling. So how about the attendance in the 3 major cities and in Pensacola?
Well, the crowds have been steadily dropping for 3 weeks in a row at this point. I mean, basically since that Dothan NWA World Title Night, when Hulk and Billy Spears both disappeared off the cards after that night. Montgomery was at 2,300. Mobile was right under 3,000 at 2,900, and Dothan was 2,500. Pensacola, with Andre on the card, was kind of like we thought, another sellout, man. About 5,100 was all that the auditorium down there on the bay would hold. But I had to attribute that not to being our crew, but to being Andre the Giant that drew that one.
Wow. All right. Earlier in the Studcast, I asked about your thoughts on the Knoxville Territory's future, and you said, let's wait until we see what was happening in the other territory. All right. You just told us that the houses had dropped 3 weeks in a row, even in the Gulf Coast Territory. So what were your thoughts about all this at this time in 1979?
Well, I knew a lot more about what was going on in Tennessee than I did in the Gulf Coast, naturally. I had been in Tennessee at this point for months now. Louis and I didn't talk nearly as much to each other as we had when he was training the Hulk, as an example. You know, he was on fire. His enthusiasm was really big time. And on Louis's behalf, there had been a real strong addition to the territory. He hadn't brought anybody in big time after the Hulk until he brought in Austin Idol, and then shortly thereafter, now the Assassins were in there. So I was concerned about Louis, man, and his sudden lack of enthusiasm. And there were these rumors about former wrestlers that I had not selected to be a part of Southeastern. When I bought the territory down there, there were a lot of wrestlers living down there in that part of the country. And I couldn't give them all a job. So I picked and chose who I wanted to. And those that didn't get picked, I think a lot of them had got their feelings hurt. You know, that was a dangerous thing to have wrestlers with their egos hurt, because if another war started down there and you had a lot of guys that used to be wrestlers that were over there at one time, and they wanted to wrestle for the other company, you know. So I was looking at a situation, and thinking a war in both territories at the same time, that could possibly end it all. I mean, I could end up with nothing, no territory. So I was basically, for the first time, really questioning having two territories. And could I be successful in saving both of them if I had to? So then I was asking myself, what if I had to choose? Which territory would I take? And what would I do with the other one? So I had all these crazy thoughts going on, man, that more and more just kept creeping into my mind.
Well, all right, here's the deal. You were 31 years old, kind of at a crossroads, I guess you would say, in your life. The decisions that you made were definitely going to affect your life forever, it seems like. All right, so how about I take you away from all this just for a minute, Stud, and give you a learning tree question for a change. You want to do that?
Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate
it.
It's been far too long, man, without a learning tree question anyway. But gosh, I'm glad. Let's do the learning tree.
Hey, let's do that. Let's bounce back with a really good one, and I'm kind of anxious to see what your answer is going to be for this. All right, so our learning tree question comes from Bobby Lane, San Francisco, California. He asked, quote, "You come from one of the oldest and largest professional wrestling families in history and were a third-generation wrestler and NWA member. Which one of your family members influenced you the most? Your grandfather or your father, and why?"
Wow. That's a great question, man. Jeez. Well, I hardly know where to start on this one, man. I guess, let's start with there was a lot of difference, man, between the two generations of Welsh wrestlers in my lineage, man, prior to me. Let's just start with the height, basically. My grandfather, Roy, was only 5 feet 8 inches tall. My father was 6 feet 2 inches tall. He was six inches basically taller than his father. So, and that was kind of only the beginning of the differences between these two guys. I mean, wow. So my grandfather, by all accounts, from the stories about him that were told to me by other wrestlers, was one mean son of a bee, man. I'll leave out the rest of that. And that's all I can say about him and what they said. And one of the first stories he told me when I was about 10 years old, and he used to come visit at his dairy. He wasn't there, but about 2 or 3 days a week, usually Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. On Mondays, they had wrestling in Memphis, and he would get me in the car, and he would take me with him to Memphis. He had a dairy in Yorkville, Tennessee, which was about an hour and a half from Memphis. So he asked me on this trip, he said, what would you do if you had a fight with someone and you couldn't beat him? Now, I'm 10 years old, so that's a far out question for a 10-year-old, So basically, I said, well, I don't know. I mean, so he said, if you get into a fight and with somebody and you can't beat him, he goes, then you got to eat him. So I asked, well, how do you do that? How do you eat him up? What do you mean, right? So he said, you start with one finger, and he said, you eat up that finger, and then you eat up the next finger, and then you eat the hand, and then you eat the arm, and so on, right? Till it's all gone, right? So, basically, that was kind of my grandfather's mindset, man, and how he built his giant 12-state territory that he made the home of it in Tennessee. I think he either beat him or he ate him, man, to get there, right? So, that's how I became one of the founders of the National Wrestling Alliance in 1948, one of the original members of the National Wrestling Alliance in 48, because he controlled basically most of the South. At one time, the biggest wrestling operation maybe in the history of the sport. So his influence on me, Mr. Lane, was probably, obviously, strength and power. Man, I mean, he certainly had that going for him. Now, my father was totally different, probably because his father had already done the dirty work. I mean, Roy had already done the nasty work of putting together a territory, and no telling how he did it. Wow. So, but my father was a multi-talented guy. Dad was a welder. And he built his own wrestling rings and his own bleachers, his own sports arenas outside in Pensacola. He built an outside sports arena, basically, to have wrestling in. Dad could run a bulldozer, and he built dams for all these farms and properties and ranches that we own. He built his own lakes on all these different places, and he trained horses, and he owned at one time an entire rodeo company, all the bulls, all the broncs. He was crazy, right? He owned thousands of acres of land during his life, and he flew his own airplane, and he landed it on his own runway on one of the farms and ranches, the Big Bend Ranch that he owned. So and then God, he was like I said, he was crazy with. Atlanta was extending the airport in the mid-1960s, and he bought 30 homes, 30 houses that were going to be where the runways were. And he moved all of those houses 30 miles south to a little town called Locust Grove, Georgia, where we had a farm. He repaired those houses, and he sold them to the poorest of neighbors for half of what they were worth, half of what he had in them. I mean, he was a strange dude. His accomplishments in wrestling, they overshadowed all of that by far. He built the first territory ever along the Gulf Coast, all the way from Tallahassee to New Orleans. He ran everything on the Gulf Coast. And he was at the same age that I was when I built my first Southeastern territory.
Wow.
25 years old.
Wow.
And in that territory, he drew one of the largest crowds in the history of Southern wrestling, Mobile, Alabama. He wrestled in the main event on that card. He exchanged hard ways with Mario Galento in one of the most violent matches ever seen in the sport. Then, 6 years later, he did it again in Atlanta in front of another Southern crowd record in the territory they owned half of. He was famous in the business for advertising. He had the most creative ways of advertising, stuff that had never been done before by wrestling companies, for sure, and maybe not by hardly any companies. And that advertising was responsible for those big Southern records that he was drawing. And he also set records in Arizona between those two territories, between Atlanta and Mobile. And Arizona, where wrestling had never been big. He set all-time records in the state of Arizona. So maybe Dad's biggest attribute and influence on me was how hard he worked. I never saw anybody work harder than my dad. He worked on farms and the ranches all day. We got up real early in the morning. He was the first one up. And then somewhere in the afternoon, he'd jump in the car and he'd leave to go to handle his other business, the wrestling business. He'd drive 200-300 miles, wrestle, then drive back. He'd get home at 2 or 3 in the morning and he'd go to bed. He'd be the first one up, man, just after sunrise, and out there in the field again. He did this for 7 days a week. I mean, it was like, it was impossible. Nobody could be that tough. And then on countless nights, after all of this driving, he'd end up coming home, but he wouldn't come home alone. He'd have some down and out person, man, who had picked up on the side of the road, a hitchhiker or whatever. And he'd get my mother out of bed and he'd have her cook them a meal.
Wow.
He'd give that person the bed to sleep in that night. He'd have him sit with us for breakfast the next morning. Mm-hmm. And I literally several times saw him take the coat off his back and put it on the guy's back before he let him leave.
Wow.
So, I could go all day, Mr. Lane. I mean, obviously, there's no doubt who influenced me most. I mean, in relation to my father, Roy, in relation to my father, Roy, Dad outgrew him, basically, by 6 inches. Roy was 5'8", Dad was 6'2". But he also outgrew Roy in so many other ways, too. Said, wow. And that's about the only thing I could brag about when it comes to the difference between me and my father. I outgrew my dad by 6 inches. But, that might be the only way I outgrew him, Dave.
Wow. I think, as always, you're probably a little too humble, especially in this situation. Your father and grandfather, both members of the NWA, but never got elected vice president of the NWA, whereas you did. Neither of them was successful in another totally different sport like hockey, and certainly not in the real business world like of security with a company like ADT like you had. To me, this is one of the best learning tree answers I think probably ever. I tell you what, this Studcast has been absolutely awesome, Ron. One of my favorites so far. So where do we ride next week?
We're going to be riding, man, into the last week of August, 1979. Wow, we're just almost into the fall of the year. It's got a tremendous card in the Coliseum, man. They got Rob and Jimmy in that hair versus the loser leave match. Crusher Blackwell is going to return to Knoxville. The Korean Assassin is going to make his Coliseum debut, and so much more. And we'll also talk about another great TV, the results of that Coliseum card and the attendances in the Coliseum, and the competing all-star event for the next night after our matches there. Then we're going to go back, obviously, down south, the southeastern Gulf Coast, and where it's continuing its slide, man. It's headed in the wrong direction, and it's making, I got a great concern at this point. Every week, because I watched this attendance just continue to drop. The talent level down there was very weak at this point. And some of the past names returned there. Louis would bring back the past names instead of bringing in new people. And so, there was a big decision for me coming there about the booker, and I was going to have to make that decision soon.
All right, on Facebook, folks, it's easy. Go to Ron Fuller Welch, the Tennessee Stud on Facebook. Like him, follow him there to become friends with a living legend. It's the same on Twitter. Ron Fuller Welch on Twitter. Follow him there, too. Check out his fantastic website, tnstud.com. You'll find every Studcast ever done, 43 Super Studcast, and Ron's Stud Store for all kinds of souvenirs, including the thrilling lion novel called Brutus. Get your personally autographed copy there. Check it out, tnstud.com. Ron's YouTube Southeastern Rewind is still red hot. 318 videos. The last 88 Studcast, including this one, 52 stud stories, and now 60 short rides with the stud, 7 Ask the Stud question and answer shows, and a whole lot more there as well on YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. You can subscribe now, Southeastern Rewind. Put that in the search on YouTube. It'll come up, and then make sure you subscribe, and you'll see the very best in old school wrestling. That's the way it's meant to be. All right, any last comments, Stud?
Well, geez, Dave, I'm so happy, man, with the response of fans from all around the world. I mean, it knocks me out, man. I can't believe how popular Studcast have become. And it seems like almost overnight. I got to thank everybody, man, out there for your support. Please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.